And I'm muted. I'm so sorry about that. Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for joining. It feels like forever since I've been here, since I've been on a show. I think just so much has been happening in my life, in my real world life, in real life, that it feels like it's been a long time, and it's kind of good to be back. It feels good to be back. That's what I can say right now. Sure, I feel like I've forgotten how to do this, to be honest. But I would like to welcome my guest, Dapper Dino. How are we doing?
Oh, I'm doing well, Roxy. I'm happy to be here. I think it's going to be a fun show. So,
Well, it's good for it's. I'm glad you accepted the invitation, and that my ship allowed a dinosaur on it.
Yeah, that is always a question, is whether or not I'm going to fit through the airlocks and whatnot.
Well, I mean, because it's the ship of the imagination, you were shrunk down to a reasonable size, so you were able to fit on.
Well, in real life, I'm only about 2 meters tall. I'm not that big.
Well, that's about 6 feet tall, roughly.
Yeah.
So
I can fit through most human-sized doors.
Okay. So you're about another half meter taller than my little character. But I think it's a good size. So
okay.
And looking dapper as usual with your tie, your monocle, and your hat always.
Of course, that's the signature look. Unless I'm on top hats off, in which case the top hat comes off.
And then your Canadian antlers come out.
Yeah, in case you guys didn't know, on my channel I'm doing a little series on some Canadian young Earth creationists, and my avatar has added antlers for that. Moose antlers specifically.
Wouldn't be any other antlers in Canada, would it?
Of course. I mean, they do have other deer up there, but come on. We all know that the primary deer associated with Canada is, in fact, the moose.
Yeah. Yes. I think that's one of the primary animals that you would think of as well.
Oh, yeah.
That's the beaver.
Yeah, moose and beaver are the big Canadian animals. But, I mean, they do also have a lot of other animals. They've got different kinds of eagles, and they've got all sorts of rabbits and chipmunks and wolves and foxes and whatnot. But yeah, it's beavers and moose. That's what you think of when you think of Canada.
Yes. I would just like to welcome Neil and Clive to the chat, and anybody else in the background just lurking and having a watch. Welcome, everyone. It's good to see you all again. So, as we know, there are 4 questions per show. We will discuss them, and these answers are raw. So again, Dapper did ask if there was any preparation. Every client, listen to me. Every one of my guests asked me if there's preparation to be done, and every time it's no. There is no prep. You cannot prep for experience, and you cannot prep for your opinion. So there's no experience. There's no preparation to be done. So it's raw answers. And like I say, I did these about this time last year, these questions. So I don't remember. I don't even remember what I ate last week. So my memory is extremely terrible. I'm busy working on it. We'll get there, but it's all good. So my answers will just be as raw as Dapper's. So don't stress about that. There are no wrong answers. There are no right answers. It's their opinion. It's the experience. So you cannot tell someone that their experience and their opinions are wrong. I don't like that idea. Also, serious. I'm gonna reword this, because when I said trolling is not accepted, I know Clive Wells had a bit of a fanny flap, if you want to call it. So no serious trolling. I don't mind fun. A fun trolling. I think that's always good to have in the side chats to make it more fun for people in the side chat. So no serious trolling, no hating on people, no bashing on people's opinions and all of that. So keep that to, if you have something ugly to say, please rather keep it to yourself. My only mod at the moment is Clive, so he unfortunately has a bit of power, but he's been here for a while, so I trust him. I trust him. I forgot to work on my memory, Clive. It's okay. You have time. You have some time. So, Dapper, are we ready to tackle these questions?
I'm as ready as I'm going to be.
Amazing. So, let's open the questions up. Here we go. And let's start with question 1. Right. Question 1 says, if there existed a perfect clone of you, would it also be you? Would it act in exactly the same manner as you, like a mirror? Or would it act differently? If it acted differently, then would it still be you? At what point would it not be you?
So that's an interesting question, and I think that there's a number of background things that we have to consider. One is, if we say as a perfect clone, does that mean that at a certain point I am duplicated exactly as I am at that point in time? And I think that's the assumption that this is going with. And so I think the question then is, are both of these entities Dapper? Does one of them have a better claim to being the person who's currently talking? Like, let's say this happens in a year. So a year from now, which one of those has the better claim to be the continuation of the person that's here talking? And I don't actually think that you could say that one has a better claim, but I also don't think that they're going to be the same person, because they're each going to, from that point on, diverge in experience. And so while initially they're going to be virtually the same in all of their mannerisms and knowledge base and personality, over time that will diverge. And so you say 30 years down the line, they won't be the same person, but will they be the same person that I am now as a continuation? And I think kind of yes. And so I think that would get into really weird, tricky things like, who gets my computer? Who gets, to sleep in my room? Because now there's two people who I think both have a legitimate claim, especially since they both have that exact same sense of continuity with the previous, previous states of myself. And so, interestingly, this was a topic that actually comes up in the Amazon Prime show Invincible. There's a character that always has a clone of himself, but the clone is a perfect clone. But before he wakes up the clone, he actually makes sure that neither of them can remember which one is the clone. So that way, neither one of them can try to be like, oh, I'm the original, I'm the real instance of us. And so every once in a while, one of the clones dies, and the remaining person, whether he's original or not, clones himself again. And so it's a really interesting thing. So I don't know if there would be a good way to solve those problems of who gets what stuff. And I think ultimately it might have to come down to, there would have to be some kind of sharing agreement, which I think it might be easy, considering that at least at first, this person or these two people are essentially the same person. So anything I think would be reasonable as a compromise, I imagine my perfect clone would also find reasonable. Otherwise, it's not a very perfect clone. So yes. I feel like we could probably get around that. But yeah, I do think that to a very large degree, they could both equally claim to be the person that I am now if this happened in the future. But they couldn't really claim to be each other.
Yeah. It's a very difficult one, because I think once you have a clone, so if you take, say for instance, you clone yourself, and it takes the whole process to create the clone. Say it takes about, let's just say, half a day to do it, right? Since you've put in the settings for that clone, you've changed in that half a day already.
Right.
So in that half a day, you've already had about, your brain has already had 2 million synapses going off. You've already thought 300 different processes already. You've already gone to the toilet. You've already eaten. You've already thought about your partner or you've already thought about your children, you've already thought about what you're doing for your next, project. So you've already changed half a day already compared to when you have put in the settings to create your clone. So by that, whoever's been in that project with you, if there is someone, especially if there is someone with you, they will be able to tell you who's the original, because they will be able to say, well, in the time that your clone was being created, you did this, this, and this, and this. Your clone was being made, so they never did those things.
Mm-hmm.
So someone else would be able to tell you, well, you're the original because at 11:55 a.m. you went to the toilet. Then at 1 p.m. you had food where your clone was still being made. So someone, if they did the project with you, they'll be able to tell you who's the original and who's not. If there's no one there with you, you will have those memories of doing it. Your clone won't. So you will know that you did those things.
Right. Well, I think so. That's one of the question that comes up is this an instantaneous cloning thing? Is this some kind of thing that takes time?
Yes, that's a good question.
Is there a way to know for sure if you're the original or the clone? And so all of those are sort of part of those background assumptions. So
yes,
my answer, I tried to go with the simplest option, which is your clone immediately appears and you don't have a reliable way to tell which of you is the clone. So maybe like you wake up one day and just in the bed is another one of you. And that one of you is also convinced that it's the real you. And all tests that you can do would show that you're both the real you. So like it has the same scars that you do, all the same memories, the same, all that.
Yes.
I think is the sort of the version of this that creates the most interesting questions. But also, there are other options. Like if it's a long process, like you see in like Multiplicity, which is a movie. In that one, a guy clones himself several times, and you can always tell which ones are the clones for a few reasons. One is, you actually see him walking around during the cloning process, but also as the clones keep cloning themselves, they start to get a little dumb, but we'll assume that doesn't happen for this purpose.
Yes.
So in that case, you can tell exactly who the original is. And I think in those cases, then things like who gets to own stuff and say who's really married to your spouse or something like that becomes a little bit easier. But then again, you also have to consider that even in those cases, that clone, as far as the clone itself is concerned, really is you. I assume they have a sense of continuity of consciousness and things like that. So I think there would be ethical considerations in the idea of making an exact clone of yourself, and then the psychological problems that are going to arise when it realizes that it's not actually the person that it thinks it is. And I think that's one of the reasons why, if this technology were possible, I think there would be some real question as to whether or not it should be a permissible thing to do, to just clone someone and have two clones going around. Which, interestingly enough, there's apparently a lot of movies about this, because there's also The Sixth Day with Arnold Schwarzenegger, which deals with things like the ethical and legal ramifications of cloning humans with their memories intact, and what it means to have one such clone around while the original copy is also around. Because spoilers for like a 20-year-old movie, but one of the things that happens is Arnold Schwarzenegger is cloned, and we actually end up following his clone through most of the movie, but the original is also around. And so he's trying to investigate what's going on, why there's a guy who looks just like him hanging out with his kid and his wife and whatnot. So
yes. Well, I mean, but the question starts with, excuse me, is the process simultaneous, or does it take time? And that will determine the rest of the question.
Yeah, I think that is important, because if it takes time, then there's an obvious way to tell who the original is. It's the one that has the memories of the time of the cloning process.
Yes.
Now, if there isn't that, then there's that real question. How would you disentangle who should be legally considered to be which person? For instance, if, say, one of the clones takes out a credit card, is the other clone now on the hook for any bills that guy racks up? Maybe.
Does the clone even have a wallet, to ask a question? So again, it's just the timing it takes for the process to happen. So let me just read the question for the people that have just arrived. So Susanna, thanks for joining. Jane, hey honey, you guys, it's so good to see you both. Theo, Clive, not Clive, I've already welcomed you, Clive, I beg your pardon. Facty, thanks for so much for coming. It's so good to see you guys. So the question is, if there existed a perfect clone of you, would it also be you? Would it act in exactly the same manner as you, like a mirror? Or would it act differently? If it act differently, then would it still be you? At what point would it not be you? So we can't answer this because we don't know what a clone would do.
Well,
I mean, if we go back to when they created the cloned sheep, we would never be able to tell because a sheep is a sheep is a sheep and they do the same thing. But with a human and it's all its complexities, it's a bit more difficult to understand.
Yeah, I think at least in terms of the would it act differently, the answer is not at first, but then differences would arise as, the two copies have different life experiences.
Yes.
Because, I mean, just something as simple as, one of them wakes up earlier one morning and has like an extra cup of coffee in the morning is enough to set up a different experience for that day. Mm-hmm. And then that's going to end up, because you remember every day is just a continuation of your previous day. So if a day goes one way and you imagine like an alternate universe where that same day went a different way, well, the next day is going to go differently too. And that's likely to just compound and become ever more different for the two versions of you if we're doing sort of the multiverse version instead of the clones. But the same is also true, within the same universe where you now suddenly have a clone. And you can also see it with things like identical twins. Identical twins tend not to have identical personalities. They tend to have similar personalities because some of your personality is going to be like predisposed genetically. But still, they'll play different sports or they'll have different tastes in literature or music or something like that. Like if you've ever met identical twins, they can be very similar, but they don't act identically.
No.
So I think that would happen as time goes on because those non-identical aspects of identical twins are exactly where life experiences are coming in. And so unless you have identical life experiences, which you can't, you're not going to end up being an identical person.
Yeah. I get you. Let's see what the side has to say. The side chat has to say. So Neil starts off. He says, physically yes, but can they be the same person if the clone has not had the same experiences? And I see Susanna said something similar. She said, I would say that it would be a different person based on his limited experiences. But if the clone has experienced the same experiences you have from the past because it's an exact clone, then yes, it's the same person based on just that alone. But I was going to
say, so this is sort of a sci-fi cloning idea, right? Where in the real world, when we do cloning, which there are clones out there, you're just using the genetic material to make a new member of the species, right? So if right now human cloning isn't being practiced to anyone's knowledge, but if it were, and you cloned yourself, what you would get would be a baby that is essentially your twin brother or sister. That's also way younger than you. But in that case, I don't think anyone would say it's the same person because we don't treat twins as being the same person. And this is essentially genetically just your twin sibling. So, but then there's the more, which I think that's the easy case. That's the case that's basically trivial. We don't even really have to talk about it because it's just, there's a baby that happens to have your same genetics. Okay, it's a new person. I don't think anyone is going to say that twins are the same person. Similarly, if you did real world cloning, that's a new person. Maybe you might be responsible for it in the same way that a parent might be, because you did genetically produce this baby, so maybe you're obligated to take care of it. I would argue yes, but I think the only way to make this question interesting is if we can clone someone at the age that they were when they underwent the process, and we can transfer all of the psychology and memory and brain states and whatnot over into the new clone. That's when the question actually becomes an interesting thing to grapple with.
Yes, I understand. I mean, I've got 2 twin boys next door to me, age 5, and I still can't tell them apart, even though they physically look a little different. You can see they look a little physically different. One's bigger than the other, but I still can't tell who's who. Yeah. And they both act extremely different, even though they are together all the time.
Right.
So if twins act differently, what's to say clones are going to act the same?
Yeah, they won't.
They will act. I think they will act differently because I feel that they won't make the same decisions as the original. Yeah,
and if we go with the same, the memory is intact, they will diverge more as time goes on. So, yes. Because like at first, let's say I have a clone, right? And we'll take something simple, right? Like I play some video games. And a clone of me with my same memories will initially start out playing the video games the exact same way I do. It'll use the same strategies. It'll play the same games with the same proficiency. But if for some reason my clone starts playing much more of one game than I do, and I start playing more of a different game, then our ability to play those games will diverge. And the same thing will happen in all areas of our life, right? So if one clone starts cooking more, I don't know, fried rice, and the other one starts cooking more, I don't know, quiches, right? Our ability to cook will become different. We'll start being better at different things cooking-wise, even though initially we're starting out at the same place. So yeah, I don't think there's any question that, at least over time, a clone wouldn't become behaviorally distinct from the original. So
yes. And that's what Theo's also saying here. As soon as your clone experiences something you don't, will you then become different? Yes.
Yeah, yes. I think the question of will they continue to act the same is the relatively easy one. I think we all tend to agree that no, they won't. I think the harder question is that clone the same person as the person who before they were cloned, right? So like I said, if I'm cloned in 10 years, is the clone that appears the same person as me right now? And I actually think it is, because it's going to have all those memories, and it's going to presumably have a sense of continuity from that time. And so I think it can have a valid claim to say, like if I open a bank account next year and then 9 years later I have a clone, I think he has a reasonable claim to say that bank account is still his.
Yeah, well, he'll have the same fingerprints, the same names, he'll look the same, everything will be the same to
Which means, guys, if you're going to clone yourself, change all your passwords and PIN numbers and whatnot during the cloning process if it takes time, and don't think of the new ones ahead of time. Use a random generator. Think ahead.
Yes. Should I plug one that I use? Maybe they'll start sponsoring me. As Clive was saying, I think it's quite funny. I'm just going to put it up again. He says, I'd want to undermine my clone as he would be stiff competition.
Well, I think
you would say something like that, Clive.
Well, that is one of the things, is I do think that how people would interact with their clone would depend on their own personality, right? Like if you're a very competitive person, you and your clone might not get along, especially since you would be such hard competition at everything you're good at. Because think about it. Who would be worse to compete against except for someone who not only has all of your strengths, but knows all of your weaknesses too? You would both be horrible competitors against each other. Well, great in one way and horrible in another way. But then again, people who are more about conciliatory efforts with other people and things like that, for that person, a clone might be a great partner. You two could get a lot of stuff done if you're really big on the cooperation. And I think that sort of competition versus cooperation exists on a spectrum in everyone. So, yeah, I think if you're a hyper-competitive kind of person, maybe don't clone yourself.
For sure. Then Theo says, I clone fungus, then grow different substrates that eventually produce mushrooms. both treated different with same end results?
Well, it is certainly the case that, I mean, you can get clones of clonal organisms like plants and mushrooms to end up with very similar results. For instance, the Cavendish banana, which is the banana that you're finding in essentially every grocery store.
Mm-hmm.
Every Cavendish banana is a clone of the one original Cavendish banana. They're all genetically identical, and they all basically taste the same. And they're all basically the same size, and basically every banana is about the same as every other banana. There are some small differences, but yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And, but the thing is that humans, and we know this for a fact because we have identical twins, for humans, a huge part of their behavior is influenced by their life experiences. And so, and not just like in the sense of like, oh, I have these different memories, but even environmental things like I was exposed to more sunlight, or my twin was exposed to, more starch in their diet. And even these things like this can cause changes to your biology and your behavior that are harder to reproduce in things like mushrooms. Because one of the things you have to remember is the mushroom is just the fruiting body of a fungus, right? It's basically the same thing as the banana on a banana plant. It's there to make more mushrooms by releasing spores. And
Yes.
so it is one of the parts of the actual whole fungus that's going to react the least to differences in environment, because what the majority of the mass of a quote unquote mushroom is the mycelial network that's strands, in some cases only one cell thick, going all through whatever it's eating, releasing digestive enzymes and absorbing nutrients from the environment. And that right there can change significantly. Like, for instance, it might be more diffuse in a large, high energy environment, or it might clump together more in a tighter knot if there's still high energy, but it's a small area. And, you can get a lot more changes, I think, in the mycelium than you're going to get in just the fruiting body. So I don't think that mushrooms are a great analogy for any particularly intelligent animal. So it might work for spiders or something. That's a good analogy. But I think once you get to the point where you're like dogs or humans or even many birds, I don't think it's going to really work.
Yeah. And then Theo, I apologize, I didn't see the next part of it. He did say, but eventually after a few gens, I didn't. I'm so sorry, Theo. I really do apologize. He said, but eventually after a few gens, they changed slightly. On the 5th gen, they express weaknesses mostly. That's
interesting. And I think that might be an adaptation to a significantly different growing medium. Because that's one of the things that you can see in a lot of laboratory experiments with a lot of organisms, is if you put them in a particular and also not usually very natural seeming nutrition regimen, they can become hyper adapted to that kind of nutrition. And then when you introduce them back into like a wild type environment, they do significantly worse. In fact, you can see that there's a really cool experiment that you can find footage of, where you take a petri dish and you divide it into different sections with increasing amounts of some particular antibiotic, right? So you have the first strip has no antibiotic, next strip has a little bit, the next strip has 10 times more, then 10 times more, or whatever. And you put a bacterial culture at one end, and then you can actually see them. They'll fill up the first strip, and then they won't move on to the second one, which has a little bit of the antibiotic, until eventually a few colonies will actually happen to end up with an antibiotic resistance. And then they'll fill up the second strip, but then they'll stop again.
Yes, I've seen that. It's pretty cool.
It is. But if you take the guys that get to the end strip and you put them back in with the original wild type in just an open container with no antibiotic, the original wild type is going to outcompete the antibiotic resistance one. Because anytime you adapt to a certain environment, you're becoming less well adapted to other environments.
Yes. So that's why I don't adapt well to the cold environments, because I live in a mostly warm environment.
There you go.
So, for instance, we, instead of having 6 months cold, 6 months warm, hot, we basically have more of a 9 to 10 month warm period, because summer for us starts in October and it ends in around May. So that's what I'm used to. So when it does get cold, like I said to you before the show, I'm sitting here with a couple jerseys on, a hoodie, a blanket, and a hot water bottle.
Yeah.
So that's me just keeping warm. So imagine me in an environment where it snows.
I hope you never have to find yourself there.
I hope I do, but I'll have the right clothing on. South Africa doesn't have the clothing for cold weather. You'll have
a week's worth of clothing on.
Unless I say, had the proper kind of clothing for that environment, then I could adapt to it because I'd have the right clothing on. But because all of our clothing is thin, even our winter clothing is very thin. We have to put more on.
Yeah.
Just to keep warm. So if I say, for instance, went to the northern parts of America where it does snow every winter or most winters, you guys have clothes for that time,
If you're in the north in the United States, it's going to snow every winter.
You see.
Yeah.
And you have coats and stuff for that time of the year, so it would be warmer. So if I got a jacket from there and I brought it to South Africa, I'd probably only wear a top, a jersey, and then the jacket, and that's it, because I'll be warm enough, and then my back wouldn't suffer every winter. So it's just it's an adaptation thing. But now we're going right off track onto adaptation.
Well, do you want to do the second question, or you want to keep?
Yes, I just want to quickly go through some of what the chat is saying. So Clive, and in his usual, he says you can't clone a quantum state, so the situation could never arise.
I agree. It's just a thought experiment.
Yes, this is all. But Clive knows that because he's been on the show before. But he can't turn off his scientific mind. He doesn't know how. What else? Here we go. Theo also says a clone could also be exactly you, but expressing weaknesses and genes like a banana. There we go.
I do think that's important. It would have your weaknesses. So if you have a genetic predisposition to some, like bad circulation or diabetes or a particular kind of cancer, your clone is going to have that exact same genetic predisposition.
Mm-hmm. But I think the clone may also have one more weakness than you.
Well, then I would say it's not a perfect clone.
No, it won't be a perfect. I don't think there is such a thing as a perfect clone. Because there will always, even when you print something, there is one pixel missing. There is something missing. The color didn't come out right there. There's always something wrong when you print something. So when you copy something, I don't think that it would come out perfect ever. If this could arise, if you could clone the quantum state, I don't think it'll be a perfect. I think it would miss an atom or a nucleus or something. It would miss something. The process will miss something. I think that's what I think, at least. Then Susanna says, I would say that it would be a different person based on his limited experiences, what we said earlier. What else? Oh, now it's just jumped. Sorry, guys. The whole thing has just jumped. You guys are quite talkative tonight about this. But I don't want to run out of time. So I think let's move on to question 2, you guys.
Okay.
And then I just want to welcome Gregory into the chat. Nice to see you. It's good to see you. Right, question 2 is, would you be able to tell if time had been altered in some way?
Well, I think that depends. So there are ways in which time is altered. We know, like physically, that time does not flow at the same rate everywhere. And we can, in fact, measure that. So, for instance, time actually moves slower on the surface of the Earth than it does in orbit. And we can tell because we have to change how fast the clocks tick in our GPS satellites to account for the different rate of time passage at where they're orbiting versus the surface of the Earth. Mm-hmm. So if something were to change the way that, say, gravitational time distortion happened, then, yeah, you could physically measure that. Now, if you mean, let's say someone went back in time and altered history Star Trek style, which I don't think is physically possible, but let's say it happened somehow, then I would say presumably no, because the previous events that were the case in the, sort of the original timeline just wouldn't have happened, so there would be nothing to remember.
Yes.
So you would have to somehow be outside of the timelines, but I don't know how something could be that. I'm not sure what it would mean to be outside of the timelines. So it really that's one of the problems with a lot of these questions. Is like it depends on exactly what you mean.
Yes.
Like what exactly do you mean by a clone? What exactly do you mean by time being changed?
I didn't type these questions out.
Oh,
I found them. I found them. I'm not that clever to think of these kind of questions.
So yeah, it's tough to say. I think there's another thing is, does time track at an objective speed that is measurable as sort of a universal like time frame? Like what would it mean if you said time everywhere is slowed down by half? Well, I don't think it means anything, because if every place in the universe has time slowed down by the same amount, then the relative time the relative flow of time is always going to be the same when you measure it from one place to the other. Because you can say, time here flows 0.6% slower than it does over there. But if they both speed up or slow down by the same factor, that relationship between the two would stay the same. And since you have to measure time within time itself, I don't think you could notice that. So I would say overall, my answer is going to be, even in the weird sci-fi cases, I don't think you could notice it if something happened to time like that.
Mm. Well, I mean, I watched an episode of Supernatural where I can't remember the Archangel's name, but he went back and changed the fact that Titanic didn't sink just because he hated the song that came with it, right? So just because of the song that came with the movie, let me rephrase that.
Was it My Heart Will Go On?
Yes. I didn't want to say it because then everybody's going to be thinking about it and
oh,
singing
sorry.
in their heads.
I ruined it.
It's okay. So he changed the fact that Titanic sank, so therefore a movie wasn't made and therefore the song wasn't made. But then fate came around and started killing off the offspring that were not meant to live. Yeah. So there was overpopulation already happening just because 1,200 people or such survived. I'm not too sure of the exact numbers. I'm just pulling numbers out. But so she had to. They made it a female, so she had to go around accidentally killing off the offspring of the people that had survived the Titanic sink, or that had survived because the Titanic didn't sink. So it was just very interesting because the people that obviously were alive and didn't know any different, they didn't know that the Titanic was supposed to have sunk.
Right.
They didn't know that there was a song called My Heart Will Go On. They didn't know who James Cameron even was, or Celine Dion even was, most of them. Because, I mean, not everybody listened to Celine Dion until My Heart Will Go On came out, So it was just fascinating to watch that timeline. People didn't know what the Titanic even was. They just knew it was one of the ships that, like every other ship. Mm-hmm. So it was just fascinating to see that the timeline, people didn't notice the shift in timeline because, I mean, they weren't born when that stuff happened, so they didn't even know the difference.
Yeah, I think if there were such a thing as time travel that could change history, that no one would be able to tell except maybe the time traveler, but then you get into paradoxes, which is one of the reasons I don't think it's physically possible to go back in time and change history. I don't think it's possible to go back in time, but even if you do, I think if you could go back in time, if that's possible, you would have already done it. Therefore, nothing you could do isn't something that already happened. And then you can say, well, what does that say for things like free will? The answer is, I don't know, and I don't really care. Because I don't think it's possible. But if time travel does actually happen, I think it would be a good, and we find out that we can't change history, it would be a good argument against free will. So if you like free will, oppose time travel research, I guess.
Well, I mean, the whole paradox thing just kills time travel anyway.
Yeah, but nature doesn't like paradoxes.
No. So you know, the difference will come if we now put the two together, the first question and second question. If your clone goes back in time,
Ooh.
what would happen then? But that's a question for if we have enough time afterwards, we'll keep that question aside. So that'll be also quite interesting. And no, fact here, I know Supernatural is not a scientific based show. It was just an example.
Wait, it's not a documentary?
I wish it was.
I don't know if I would do, because that might be a little scary. There's a lot of stuff in Supernatural that I'm glad isn't real.
Well, to think about it, the apocalypse that was supposed to happen in 2012 was saved because of the Winchester boys. Thank you very much. The world was saved because of the Winchester boys.
But, well, it's been saved every year for years now by the Winchester boys, which actually is, it's not my favorite thing about the show. It's actually something that I kind of got tired of. It's like every season is just a new apocalypse, guys. You got to come up with a new storyline.
Oh my goodness, but I still enjoy it. I need to actually finish watching it. Right, let's move along.
Okay.
So Tusk says, our timeline could change constantly. We wouldn't be aware of it because it's how it's always been.
Yeah, I agree. If changing the timeline is possible, then I don't see how you could possibly be aware of it. And then it also asks the question, well, then how did anyone go back in time to change it in the first place? Which is why I think ultimately you can't change the timeline.
No, I don't think so, because what you're going back to do is what you've already done. So you're going to keep constantly going back to change what you think what you wanted to change, and you're doing it anyway. So there's nothing to change.
Yeah.
So the outcome, I think I just went around in a circle and didn't make sense in my head now as I'm speaking about it.
Well, that's one of the problems with time travel. That's one of the reasons why I'm not a big fan of a lot of time travel TV. Like, people who know me know that I'm a pretty big Star Trek fan, but with a very few exceptions, I don't like the time travel episodes very much. Like City on the Edge of Forever is obviously an exception because it's one of the best episodes of any Star Trek ever, and it does involve time travel, but it's not good because of the time travel. It's good because of the character drama. And so overall, yeah, I'm not a big fan of time travel plots because it's hard for me to suspend my disbelief because so little of it is going to end up making sense.
Yes. But even in Supernatural, they do time travel. They go and warn their mother about a certain demon, and she makes the deal anyway, but just differently. So it what is meant to happen will happen. It will just happen differently.
Right.
But then the question is, did it really happen differently? Or are you sure it wasn't meant to happen that way?
Yeah.
Because you went back and think you changed something, you actually didn't. It was supposed to happen that way because you went back to try and stop something from happening.
Yeah.
So how it happened was meant to happen, but you just think it's happened differently because you went back in time to change it. But in actual fact, you were going back in time anyway to try and change something. So that's why it's always happened that way.
Well, I like that we're going with a theme of going to like film media as our examples. There was a time travel story that I do like, and I think it was the Twilight Zone, but it might have been the Outer Limits. But it was one of those sort of like 50s speculative anthology series, right? And so there's a guy who invents time travel. And so he decides to go around through time fixing various injustices and whatnot. So at one point he tries to kill Hitler. I think he tries to stop certain disasters. And finally he realizes that no matter what, he can't actually seem to change anything. So he eventually decides he's just going to find a quiet corner of time and space to settle down in and just live out the rest of his life happily there. And so he finds a place where there's been very few disasters or anything. It's some little Midwest town in the United States. And the only big thing that happened was a schoolhouse burned down, and there was only one death, and it was the teacher. Well, turns out after he gets there, he ends up falling in love with the teacher. And so he's pleading with her not to be in the school at the time of this fire. But she thinks he's crazy because, I mean, that sounds crazy.
Mm-hmm.
And so he decides that in a panic, he's going to run off to the school and try to grab her out of there before the fire starts. But it turns out that in doing that, he knocks over a lamp and starts the fire. And she dies in the fire because it was his fault the whole time.
Oh, wow.
And if time travel is possible, as depressing as it sounds, I think that is the most realistic depiction of it.
Yes. But, you know, then again, it comes to that also that situation with Neo in the Matrix. If the Oracle didn't mention about knocking over that the vase, would he have knocked over the vase?
Good question. Could she have not mentioned it, though?
No, because it was meant to happen, so he could see what she was trying to tell him to be true.
So, yeah, I think... So, there's... And going back to the original question, if you take it in the more interesting way, in terms of like time travel and paradoxes, I don't think that such things are logically consistent. It's not that they're not just impossible from like a physics standpoint. I think they're impossible from an ontological standpoint. Like these are ontological contradictions. And by definition, an ontological contradiction cannot exist. So I don't think that you can change timelines this way. And so it might be interesting in a different way to talk about like, how would you measure if the relative time flow between locations changed in a way that is not an ontological impossibility? So for instance, time on Earth could slow down by 20% and then not have that happen elsewhere in the universe. So the rest of the universe would seem to be going faster from the perspective of Earth. And I do think you could figure that out.
Yeah. Welcome, Icarus. And Icarus says, if in Star Wars they can destroy a Death Star every few movies, then they can save the world every season in Supernatural.
See, that's actually, though, one of my big complaints about Episode 7 is that there was just another, again, even bigger Death Star. It's like, guys, you need a new plot line.
Well, I haven't watched Star Wars or Star Trek, so I have no opinion about these things.
Roxy, you got to get on that. There's some good stuff in there.
No, I've tried to watch Star Wars. I fell asleep. And I love space, as you can tell.
Right.
So movies about space should interest me, but I just couldn't stick with the Star Wars movie. I don't know why, but I just couldn't stick with it.
Well, I would say try some Star Trek. Start with The Next Generation Season 3. There you go.
Ooh, that's an interesting one. The Mandela effect.
I assure you, I was never a velociraptor. So the thing about the Mandela effect is that it's
another topic all on its own.
Yeah, but real quick, my like, couple minute take is
sure.
The Mandela effect is always really obscure things that no one has any good reason to have an exact memory about, right? So for instance, what it's named for is the idea that a lot of people, especially in the United States, thought that Nelson Mandela had died in prison in the 80s, which is not true.
No.
But good luck finding anyone in South Africa who thought that.
No, because we know he died in 2014.
Right. And he was 14? Yeah, and he was a big deal for all that time. And so you couldn't be in South Africa without knowing what was up with Nelson Mandela. So
he was our president after he came out of jail. So there's no way he could have died in prison.
Right. So it's always these things that for the people who experience the quote unquote Mandela effect are basically just not a big part of their lives, right? It's just some little detail. Because to be honest, during the anti-apartheid movement, a lot of Americans were paying attention to what was going on in South Africa. But then once apartheid was legally abolished, Americans stopped caring about South Africa. I got to be honest with you.
Well, thanks, guys. We love you too.
Sorry, but I mean, like, look, I can almost promise you that the average United States citizen couldn't tell you what the difference is in terms of like ethnic categories between Black and Bantu in South Africa.
Oh, they can't even tell. They won't be able to tell the difference between the different ethnicities of the Xhosa, the Zulus, the Vendas. We can't even tell.
Yeah.
Me as a white person in South Africa, I can't even tell. So unless they speak the certain language and someone that understands the language can tell you, or if they tell you themselves.
Yeah.
Otherwise, we won't know the difference.
So that's the thing with the Mandela effect, is it's always these little tiny things that you wouldn't be expected to remember exactly anyway. Like one famous one, at least in the United States, is there's a series of children's books. There you go, called the Berenstain Bears.
Yes, I've heard of this. Yes.
And so a lot of people remember it being the Berenstain Bears with an E instead of an A at the end, because Stein is a common ending for surnames for Jewish people, especially the types of Jewish people who moved to the United States, which is primarily Western European Ashkenazi Jews. Because, in case you guys didn't know, there's a whole big diversity in the cultural background of Jewish people in the world. But in the United States, by far the predominant ones are Ashkenazi Jews from Western Europe. And that ending is common for them. And so a lot of people just remember it that way. But it was no other than that, like maybe the authors of these books, it was not a big part of anyone's life which vowel appears as the fourth to last letter in those titles. And so, yeah, of course you misremember it. And you misremember it in a predictable way. You remember the more likely ending of a last name that sounds like that, because there are more names that end in EIN than AIN.
Yes.
So that's the thing with the Mandela effect. It looks exactly like what you would expect from creatures with fuzzy memory, which is what humans are.
Yes, I used to. I'm going to say this now with a lot of remorse. I used to be a work person. I used to follow a lot of that stuff, and there are so many more. Like for instance, Fruit Loops is one of them. Mirror, Mirror on the Wall, which is actually Magic Mirror on the Wall. So there are so many, and there are so many that cannot be explained, and so many that can be explained. And one explanation that came about was when the Hadron Collider did its first test, and it collided colliding two atoms. The whole world shifted to another dimension. Yeah, that's why the Mandela effect happens.
But then we have the problem that people have been misquoting famous things for millennia, right? Like, you can look around and you can see people misquoting Homer's Iliad in the ancient world. Does that mean that there's two atoms collided somewhere on Earth in, the year 1500 BC, and Earth shifted into a new reality in 1500 BC, and then again the next time someone decided to misquote Virgil? See, that's the problem, is that humans have been doing this kind of thing with misremembering and changing around famous quotations just a little bit for as long as we can tell that humans have been quoting things, basically.
Yes, but that happens with everything, even the Bible.
Yeah, so I don't see that as good evidence that something has shifted reality.
No, it's just a misinformation, a misrepresentation of what actually happened.
Yeah.
There are. Jane wants to know: can we have a remote control like Adam Sandler from his movie, which is Click?
In reality, I doubt it. I can't imagine how that would work. The only one that might make sense is the fast forward option, because there are things that we know we can do to the human brain, or maybe the slow motion option, because we know that there are things you can do to the human brain to alter its perception of time. So you can make it so that people have trouble forming memories and they start to perceive time as going faster. We also know that things like pumping them full of things like adrenaline and other certain sort of psychoactive chemicals can make their perception of time slow down, so that they end up noticing more and it seems like things take longer, which can slightly increase their reaction time, although still your nerves can only send signals to your body so fast.
Yes.
So you're not going to end up being like, bullet time like it's the Matrix or something. But there are ways that you can chemically induce different perceptions of time in humans. So I don't think it would be with a remote. It would have to be with some kind of drug dispenser. But you could, I think, slow down and speed up your perception of time chemically.
Well, I mean, he also tries to do things autonomously, and we already do that. I mean,
that was the
how
point.
many times do you get home and not remember how you got home, even though you weren't drunk?
Yeah. You just automatically you just go on autopilot. So that is actually part of the point of the movie, because you got to remember the movie isn't actually about a remote control that changes time. It's actually it's supposed to be a commentary on how we use our time and what things we pay attention to in our lives, and why it is that some of us end up paying attention to what turns out to be the wrong thing.
And that's why it's the only movie I like of Adam Sandler.
Fair enough. I also liked Punch Drunk Love.
No.
No?
Maybe that's in 50 First Dates, but I just like Drew Barrymore. Anyway, so wrong one because it jumped. Susanna says, is the past even real, or just a series of memories placed in our minds?
Well, so there's a question as to what it means to be real. So there's one sense in which you could say only the present exists. But then you could also say, well, if we do things like take a look at relativistic space-time diagrams in which time is just another axis, then you could say that the past, the present, and the future all exist, and time is simply how we interact with the universe, and it's not something that actually moves in and of itself. You could also say that, but one thing I think we can know for certain is that our memories are not completely disconnected from previous states of the universe, because our memories can be corroborated in probably most cases with physical evidence. So for instance, if you remember having gone to Disney World as a kid, well, fortunately, Disney World exists, and we have evidence in terms of things like planning permits and land titles and things like that show that it has existed for a certain period of time. And if you check and you see, okay, well, then it existed when I remember going to it. Then you say, well, I got there by plane. And you can check to see, were there flights going to Disney World, or, I think it's Miami-Dade International is the airport there, around the time that you remember it. And so you can use these external checks to validate that your memory has some correlation to past events that happened outside of your brain.
I think I missed it. I missed putting it up. But Susanna has also just mentioned that time is a man-made concept.
Yes and no. So we know that there are physical phenomena that process through time, and at its most basic, time is a function of thermodynamics. So overall, systems tend to go from states that can be represented by only a small number of microstates to macrostates that can be represented by much larger numbers of microstates, which is essentially what entropy is. You can also measure it as the amount of energy in a system which is unavailable to do work because of the energy gradients that exist in the system. And this has to do with the second law of thermodynamics, which is probably the most famous of the laws of thermodynamics, because it's what gives us the arrow of time. It's what tells us that some reactions are essentially irreversible. There are certain things that you can tell are going forward through time by how they act. So for instance, a classic example of the second law of thermodynamics in operation is if you have a hot cup of tea and you put it on your desk and you forget about it and you come back later, it's going to be room temperature. Well, yeah, but actually it's what it actually is it's room temperature, but water, which is what tea is mostly water, has a higher thermal conductivity than air. So it takes heat away from your body when you touch it faster than the air does, and your body can only tell how fast heat is going in or out. It doesn't have an objective temperature sense. So when you drink something that's room temperature, it feels colder than the room because it's removing heat faster than the air. But if you were to measure the temperature of the coffee or tea, it would still be the same temperature as the room. So there's a little bit of interface between physics and biology there. But anyway.
So it only feels ice cold because your mouth is a lot warmer than the air around you.
Well, it's because of the rate that the heat goes. So different substances have what's called a thermal conductivity, which means it's how fast they transfer heat in and out of them when you touch them. So metals have extremely high thermal conductivity. That's why if it's a hot day out and you touch a piece of metal, that can feel like it's burning you. Whereas if you touch a piece of ceramic, it doesn't feel like it's burning you. They might be the same. In fact, they're almost certainly going to be the same temperature, But ceramic has a much lower thermal conductivity. It holds onto its own heat and doesn't transfer it out very easily, whereas metal will transfer heat out almost immediately. So water transfers heat faster than air does. So, for instance, if you're in a room that's, let's say you're in an enclosed box, and we're going to ignore the problem that you need to keep breathing oxygen. So we're just going to pretend you don't need to do that. So you're in a closed box. There's nothing outside the box, and the box is, let's say it's 40 degrees Celsius. Eventually, unless you can somehow, do things to keep yourself cool, which eventually you won't be able to, your body will reach 40 degrees. But the air will not feel like it's currently burning you, even though it's bringing you up to a temperature where you're going to die. But instead, you were put in a metal suit that was heated to 40 degrees, and then, or let's say 45, so we know it's definitely going to kill you, right? That would feel like it's burning you the whole time, even though it's actually not any hotter, and it's not going to get you to a higher temperature than the air is. That's why you can reach your hand in a 500, I'm going Fahrenheit because I cook in Fahrenheit, but like you can reach your hand into, say, a 200 Celsius oven, and it feels okay, right? Like you can put a tray in a 200 degree Celsius oven without a glove, but you can't take it out without a glove after it's been in there. It's because of the difference in thermal conductivity of metal versus air.
Yes.
So that's why your coffee or your tea feels cold, even though it's actually the same temperature as the room.
It's fascinating, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. But anyway, so that's the second law of thermodynamics. And that happens. We know it goes forward. Mm-hmm. We know that your coffee will cool down, and the room actually will also marginally heat up as the temperature gradient equalizes. And that means that we know that time objectively does flow in a particular direction. There is a directionality of time because of the second law of thermodynamics.
Okay. All right. So there are some things that have no choice but to move forward.
It used to be the sharks were thought to be an example of that. Turns out that's not actually true.
No, I meant move forward in time, not move forward as in physically move forward.
Hey, but I like sharks, though. I get to talk about sharks every once in a while.
Well, there we go. But I do have two questions for you. One from Susanna. She asks, can Dino give me a cup of time?
No, but I also can't give you a cup of photons. But we know that photons exist. So the ability of me to put something into a physical container is not a good measure of its reality.
There you go, Susanna. And then Gregory asks, if we could go back in time, would you let Kent become a doctor?
I would still let Kent become a doctor if he does the work and actually passes the exams. He doesn't.
And knowing what we spoke about just now, even if you did stop him, he's still going to do it.
Yeah.
He's still going to do it.
Yeah, I neither can nor would I try to stop Kent Hovind from becoming an actual doctor. I think it would be good for him to actually have to buckle down and actually have to be correct about things and be able to demonstrate his points before an audience that is skeptical and that he's subject to.
I think the only thing I'd like to change is the people that actually listen to him that think that he's right.
Yeah, I wish I could wake some of them up.
Then Clive says the universe started at a low entropy state. This defines the arrow of time. Yeah,
this is actually probably true. The reason that we can see entropy continually going down through time is because we started at extremely low entropy rate, and we're still at a fairly low entropy state in the universe as a whole. But when entropy gets much, much higher, at a certain point, quantum fluctuations that reduce entropy will be about as likely as processes that increase it. And at that point, it will be hard to say that there is an arrow of time.
Well, the universe is going one way at the moment.
Right.
And that's upwards. So that's going forwards in time.
Yes, but at a certain point, it may get to the point where the flow of time essentially stops.
Yes. Well, the flow of the universe, we're not too sure if that's, if time's going to stop with it.
Well, that's the thing. If the arrow of time is defined by our proximity to a extremely low entropy period, that it actually might be the case that when entropy is when entropy is high enough in the entire universe, that because there are quantum fluctuations that can locally decrease entropy, it might actually be impossible to define what forward in time versus backward in time is, because you will see entropy go down globally about as often as you see it go up.
Yes.
So that would actually, yeah. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, sorry, carry on. No, carry on.
Oh, I was just going to say, so that would actually make it hard to define an arrow of time.
Yes. And if the universe does go backwards into a big crunch, would we know the difference on Earth?
Well, no, Earth would be long destroyed.
Yeah, I know that, but just to say that humans were alive, would we be able to feel the backwards process of the universe?
So it's not clear. So there are some. First of all, it doesn't look like a big crunch is going to happen. So let's get that out of the way. It's the least likely scenario for the ultimate phase of the universe is the big crunch. So, but let's just say it happens. We're wrong about our measurements of the shape of the universe, and it actually is slightly closed. Okay, there are competing ideas, and part of this is that we don't have a great idea about things like quantum gravity. The answer is maybe we would notice, maybe we wouldn't. If we wouldn't notice, it will be because time essentially is starting to flow backwards. But if that isn't what happens, if we continue to crunch and only at the very last stages does entropy significantly start to go down, then we probably would see the universe as continuing with forward arrow of time continue to shrink, and galaxies get closer and closer and things like that. So it's a big maybe. And of course, also, it probably won't happen.
But that means time is still going forward. As Susanna asked, she asked Clive, so if the expansion of the universe stops and starts to collapse, would time go backwards? So Clive did say no.
Well, that's the thing is, I think the answer is no, but there are physicists who would disagree. And the problem is we don't have a great model of quantum gravity, which is what we would really need to make sense of collapsing space-time in terms of how it's going to affect the arrow of time. I agree that it probably means that no, time is going to keep going forward.
Yes.
But people smarter than me disagree.
Well, there's always someone smarter than us, isn't there? Yeah. Smarter than me, smarter than you, smarter than Clive even. So Clive then continues with an explanation. The big crunch is a very high entropy state. It would have a large number of black holes which are of enormous entropy.
That's true, but then you also have to realize that when you measure the entropy of the whole space-time manifold in which the universe exists, at a certain point, the entropy is going to start going down as you start to increase the energy density. So you're going to get to a point where, because you have everything in such a small area, the number of quantum states that can effectively describe that macro state is going to start going down. And so eventually you're going to get to things like a state where the density of matter is similar to the degenerate matter in, say, a neutron star, where the distance on average between nucleons is similar to the exclusion distance based on the Pauli exclusion principle. At that point, only a very small number of quantum states can describe that condition of the universe. So at a certain point, entropy is going to have to start going down if you're recollapsing the universe.
Wow, I thought I knew a bit about the universe. I feel dumb right now. But that's okay, because that means there's lots to learn. So Theo then asked the question, does time and gravity affect each other?
Yes. So the easiest way to think about it is the higher the gravity that you're under the effect of, the slower time goes for you relative to the rest of the universe. So if we imagine a hypothetical observer who essentially has no gravity around them, perhaps the vector sum of all the gravity of all the masses in the universe for this particular spot in space just happens to cancel out. I don't think such a place exists, but we'll imagine one. Every other place in the universe will be having time flow at a slightly slower rate, depending on how much gravity there is there. And at certain points, like for instance at the event horizon of a black hole, for such an observer, time would effectively stop. So that's like I mentioned earlier, when we use GPS satellites, we actually have to have their clocks tick at a different rate that we use relativity to calculate, because they are at significantly less gravity, which, by the way, guys, there is gravity in space.
So what I learned from watching Interstellar, I know it's not the perfect movie to watch, but it's still good.
Yeah.
That when you are, the closer to gravity you are, the faster time goes. Am I wrong? Or am I going to reverse?
So it's reversed. The closer you are to a gravity well, the slower time is going to go.
Oh yes, because they were on a planet for 2 years, for 2 hours. We're further away from the black hole. Time went faster, so he was stuck on the ship for 20 years.
Yeah,
roughly, rather than the 2 hours they were stuck on that planet. So. And that to me, I found so fascinating. And I actually like to watch that movie over again because there's so many times that I actually miss something. And it's so fascinating to watch. I know that there's some stuff that they put in to drive the storyline forward, like the fifth dimension of the bookshelves and things. I know that's to drive the story forward. So you can't survive a black hole. There's no ways. You'll be spaghettified and die. But
well, you might not be spaghettified, but you will die. There are black holes that won't spaghettify you. It depends on essentially the gradient of the gravity, the difference between the effect at one end of you versus the other. So there are some where the gradient is slow enough. Oddly enough, it's the larger the black hole is, the less likely you are to be spaghettified.
Okay. Oh yes. Okay, I see what you mean. So I think I'm here with Facty that gravity doesn't affect me. Like if I jumped a bit high, I think I would lose everything and I'd be lost in space because I don't have much to hold me down. But that's just a funny. Clive says, and after these few, we'll move on to the next question. Clive says, time and gravity are intimately linked as gravity is space-time curvature.
Yeah, that's true.
Neil agrees with me that it was a great movie. So he can stay in the side chat. He doesn't need to be timed out. Clive then says much of physics in Interstellar is correct through the storyline, though the storyline is nonsense. Yes, the storyline, I know. The whole bookshelf thing was just a way to drive the movie, the storyline forward. But there were scientists working on the movie to help with the whole wormhole scenario, as well as the whole what a black hole could look like. And this was where this movie came out long before the first image of a black hole came out anyway, or the light around a black hole came out anyway. So I thought it was very, very good. I thought the idea of what they thought a black hole looked like was actually brilliant. The fact that light, it looks like, if you look at the black hole from afar, it looks like the light is going around it on a flat axis, and when you look at it from a different axis, it looks like it's got light, in three different places, if that makes any sense. So the top of the hole, the bottom of the hole, and around the hole. So it looks like it's got like rings around it. That's what it looked like to me, at least.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So because of the bending of time and space around the black hole, the light from behind the black hole has curved up.
Yeah.
So that's why it looks like it's because space, as we know, is flat. The light behind the black hole has been curved up because of space-time, and so it looks like it's above the black hole and around the black hole because of time and space, and because time and space is cool like that.
Yes.
That's how I understand why the black hole light looks so weird. It looks like it's around, and as well as around it, around the diameter and around the top part, so from pole to pole. Am I making any sense?
You are. So it really is the case that this is the light bending because the space around it has bent, and you see this effect much more significantly with black holes than anything else.
Yes.
Although you would also be able to see it around, say, a neutron star or even just other galaxies. So we have gravitational lensing around galaxies in things like Hubble Deep Field images.
Yes, and I think those images are actually really beautiful.
Oh yeah.
Really, really beautiful. Right. We are going into a topic that I still absolutely love, but we can't stick on one topic.
No worries.
It would be nice to just have a chat about that. It would be nice to just have one chat about that. It would be very interesting. I think what I would like to do, Clive, you can let me know in the side chat if you're willing to, and Donna, if you also want to. I would like to have a conversation about this stuff. Just off topic, no questions. We will pick one question about whatever, about space. And I would like to have a conversation with the both of you, both on my show. Would that be okay with you?
Oh, with me and Clive?
With you and Clive, yeah.
Oh, yeah, that's fine by me.
Clive, you can let me know if you're willing to do something like that. I think that would be very interesting, and it would tickle my amateur space funny bone. I would love that. I would absolutely love that. Okay, so when Clive decides to answer, we'll talk to him about it, and then we can organize a time to do that.
Okay.
Right, let's go on to the third question. Third question is, your perception of the world is just what your brain constructs of you from the signals sent by your senses. Mm-hmm. Wow, this is going to be an intense question. Plus, there is a slight delay. So you aren't even experiencing the simulation of real time. What would it be like if humans could perceive what the world is actually like and do in real time? Also, what are the ramifications of every single person's reality being a little different and unique to them?
So
that's a very loaded question.
Yeah, I want to take a look at the first one. What would it mean to experience raw reality as it is? And I think the problem there is that I'm not sure that is a question that actually makes sense, because when you think about how things interact at a fundamental level, what you're actually getting is interactions between various particles via things like force carriers and whatnot. So it's not that, say, electrons actually end up colliding with each other when they scatter off of each other. Instead, what happens is as they get closer and closer, the likelihood of having a force carrier communicate the negative charge of the electrons to each other gets higher and higher. And as they get closer and closer, the likely strength of that force carrier gets higher and higher. And therefore, at a certain point, which is somewhat stochastic, they will scatter off of each other. And that's kind of how everything works at a fundamental level. You're not ever really touching anything. Force carriers are going back and forth between various particles in, say, you and, say, the table, if you put your hand on the table, and repelling you. So I don't actually know that it means anything to experience reality as it is, as opposed to via the medium of some intermediate, because reality interacts with itself via intermediates. So, for instance, light really is a bunch of photons hitting something. So how would you experience light except by photons hitting you, which is what you are experiencing when you see things. So it's... And then the other problem is, so if you're experiencing reality, and what are you going to not filter it through your brain? Well, then what is doing the perception? So to me, it's a question that I'm not sure actually means anything. It sounds really profound, but I also think it might actually simply not really carry any meaning to experience reality as it is.
Yeah.
Now you could say, what if you process the information differently, which is what the second part gets to. So this is the sort of you might have thought of this as a kid, thinking like, okay, so I see colors, but I only use words to describe them. I can't directly get someone else inside of my brain to show them what colors look like to me. What if they look different to someone else, but because we're all been trained to say that, hey, this object is blue because it reflects light at a certain wavelength, and even though you perceive it differently than me, we both know that it's that particular set of wavelengths that has been defined as blue by the English language. So we both call it blue. And there's not an easy way to figure out whether or not everyone has the same perceptions like this. So these are called in philosophy qualia. So the qualia are your subjective impressions of the world around you. And there is no easy way to determine that people have essentially similar qualia for the same phenomena. So, but then if the question is, how does that affect things? I'm not sure it does ultimately, because we still are able, despite how different our qualia may be, to agree on a set of terminology to describe what we encounter in a way that more or less is objective across most people. So, for instance, if I describe a fire truck as red, then other English speakers who aren't colorblind say, in which case we know there's a difference in qualia because they cannot objectively experience the world the same way everyone else does, or describe it the same way everyone else does. But let's say we set aside disabilities for now in sensory perception. So setting that aside for now, everyone who speaks English tends to agree that the fire truck is red. So whatever our qualia are, we're able to still get along as if they were the same. And in fact, the fact that we have people with disabilities, I think, is circumstantial evidence to indicate that qualia are at least fundamentally similar for people who lack such disabilities. So for instance, the fact that there are colorblind people, I think, is weak, but still existing evidence that people who are not colorblind all have a similar sensation of color.
Yes. But then you get people that see a lot more color than the average person. So they're going to come to say, yes, that's red, but that is that specific red. So that is candy apple red, not just red. So for instance, you get a person that will go out and look for black clothes. They won't be able to find just black clothes. To you and I, the black jeans and the black shirts are going to look exactly the same. But to the person that can see a million more colors, will see them as different shades of black, and they're not going to be able to pick anything because it doesn't look one type of black to them.
Well, I am not convinced that this is a physical difference between people. And I say that because I myself am currently better at perceiving differences in color than I used to be. And that started when I started doing a lot more artwork, when I was having to really, really pay attention to what color I was looking at in order to reproduce it or in order to get the exact look I was going for. And so I've trained myself to be able to notice differences in color that me, say, 20 years ago would never have noticed.
Yes, and myself as well. I kind of see the difference between turquoise and teal. Most people see those two colors very different, even though turquoise is more blue, where teal is more green. So some people don't see the difference. So I'm losing where the conversation was going now. This is such a fully loaded question.
Qualia.
Perceiving reality as and when it's happened, we will never know what that's like because we are, because we already feel like we're experiencing life as it's happening.
Yeah.
The only time you see a difference is when you're watching it through a video camera because you're recording. You see it like a, 0.01 split second of a time after it's actually happened, because the imagery has to go from light particles and be translated into visual particles and however happens.
Yeah,
that still takes time. So you're seeing it at a different time to when actually someone next to you is actually watching what you're videotaping.
Now there is one thing that I think might be interesting, which is so your brain takes in a lot of information, and most of it just gets rid of. It essentially, your brain it's sort of like doing JPEG compression on its own perceptions, right? Like, you only need so much information, and your brain takes in a whole lot more, and it very quickly decides which it's going to actually present to your conscious mind and which it's not. So you could then ask the question, well, what if your brain wasn't doing that? What if you had to be consciously aware of every single ounce of information that your senses were taking in? And I think that would actually be basically torture.
I'm sorry, I missed that. What would be torture?
Actually having to be consciously aware of every little bit of information that your senses take in. I don't think you would want to be able to do that. There would just be so much, because everything at that point would be, according to your brain, getting the same amount of significance. So the exact pattern of highlights on, say, my little echo cancel foam tiles would be just as important to my brain as, say, the shapes of the letters on the screen that I'm seeing in chat. And that would probably drive me crazy because I couldn't actually focus on anything, and everything would just be just a mess of way too much information. So
it's very overwhelming.
Yeah.
Susanna, she says, so much of what we experience is the way in which we are able to process the information.
Yeah. So I think that is, perhaps that would be a better version of the question, is what would it be like if your brain didn't filter out what it considered to be extraneous information? And I think it would be horrifying. Like even just simple things like yesterday I cut my finger a little bit. And so when I think about it, when I look at my finger and I think, okay, how's my finger feel? It stings a little. But most of the time, I have a Band-Aid on. I don't really feel it because my brain is like, okay, it just is. There's a constant low level of pain in your finger. Just ignore it.
Yes.
And that's what I do. But if I couldn't do that, if every little tiny thing that hurt even just a little bit was thrust in front of my brain, I mean, like every time, because if you think about it, most people are probably in tiny bits of constant pain. But imagine if you had to think about that every second of every day. Everything you perceived was thrust right to the front of your brain. It would be awful.
I think there would be a lot
want
of
to
suicides.
Die. Oh yeah,
suicides.
I wouldn't want to exist like that. I would think that oblivion would be better than existing with a complete no filter on your perceptions. But when it comes to the question, I don't think you can exist without your perceptions themselves being a filter. Because, for instance, your eyes, by being unable to detect certain wavelengths of electromagnetic radiation, means that those things are filtered out of your perspective. You can't see X-rays. You can't see infrared. But could you have something that doesn't filter anything that you perceive? Could you perceive all of the wavelength of the electromagnetic spectrum and then make sense of it? I don't think you could. So I think ultimately the only reason that we can make sense of the world and function as, sentient creatures in a way that makes sense at all is because we do not experience reality with low levels of filtration. We experience it with very high levels of filtration.
Yeah. And Theo says, if you switch off your senses, excuse me, how would you experience it?
So there's an interesting question. You can talk to people who have had who have lost certain senses, right? So you can talk to people. I think the easiest one is people who have gone blind, because it's a lot of people who are blind were not always blind. And the thing is, if you ask a blind person what they see, the answer isn't black, even if they know what black is because they can remember what it looked like. They literally don't see anything. It's like what you see from the back of your head.
Yes.
There isn't a perception there to talk about. And it's hard to imagine for someone who is constantly surrounded by perceptions. So, for instance, a deaf person doesn't hear nothing. They don't even hear nothing. There is no sense of silence for them. So
would they not just hear a constant ringing in their ears?
Nope, they don't even hear that.
Because that's what I hear. Nothing I'm going deaf.
That's tinnitus.
Yes, I know that's tinnitus. I know. It's so weird to hear that. A deaf person doesn't even hear ringing in the ears. That a blind person can't tell you what they're seeing because they don't know what they're seeing.
No, they're not even. As far as anyone can tell, they're not even seeing anything. So, for instance,
no, that's what I'm saying. They can't tell you what it is in front of them because they can't see what's in front of them. So they can't even tell you what's behind the back of their eyelids.
Yeah,
because they're not seeing that either. So whether they close their eyes or not, they're not seeing that.
Right.
They're not seeing anything. So they're seeing black because that's what we think is nothing.
Yeah, we perceive an entire absence of light as blackness, but if your brain doesn't have the frame of reference of it experiencing light, at least recently, it's going to just completely shut down your perception even of black, and you're just going to not see anything.
I think that would be the most scariest thing for me, is to not see.
Well, I mean, people do manage to get along without sight or hearing I don't have a whole lot of experience with blind people, but I do have a pretty extensive experience with people who are deaf. I have deaf family members, and I know I now know much less, but I used to actually be pretty okay at American Sign Language, and so it definitely does change the way that you live your life when you have lost what humans would consider to be a major sense. But it's something people live with, and they manage to get along pretty well, especially in the modern world where we make a lot of attempts to make sure that people with various disabilities can get through as much of life without trouble as possible. You're always going to experience additional difficulties, right? It's always going to be more dangerous to cross the street if you're deaf or blind. There's nothing that anyone can do to fix that problem.
Yeah.
But we've come a long way in making it so that people without these senses have an easier time. There are actually those senses that are much worse to lose. So probably one of your most important senses to have is actually the somatic sense, which tells you how your body is positioned relative to itself. So you don't have to look at, say, your foot to know where it is in relation to your other foot. You have a sense of where your body is, but you can lose that. People with brain damage have lost that ability, and they can get into serious trouble. They have trouble walking, they have trouble eating. They have to be physically looking at their own body to know what it's doing. And that can be extremely dangerous, much more dangerous than just being deaf in many cases.
So I feel very lucky, and I feel very lucky at being able to not have to do that.
Yeah, it's
not have to watch my body and what it's doing, just so I can do something. I think that's a really awesome thing to feel.
Imagine something as simple as chopping vegetables. Most people can look up from chopping a vegetable and be reasonably safe. Now, you should watch yourself while you're chopping vegetables. But imagine if you couldn't tell where your hands were and you were trying to chop vegetables, and something startled you and you looked up and you decided to go back to chopping vegetables. For all you know, your hand might be right under the knife.
Yeah.
So
very thought.
Yeah, so losing senses can radically alter the way that you have to live your life.
Yeah.
And it's now. But that being said, like I said, people do live happy, fulfilling, meaningful lives without any given sense. In fact, even some people without multiple senses. We've had people who are blind and deaf live meaningful, fulfilling lives.
Yes.
So. There you go.
Right. So Clive says, "I'm not sure that same yeah, I can't English today. I'm not sure. I think he meant to say sure and not Sue. I'm not sure that same perceptions mean anything if experienced by different brains."
Yeah, that's an open question in philosophy when you're talking about like philosophy of consciousness and talking about qualia and stuff. It's not even clear what it means to have the same perception between two different brains. It's also actually, oddly enough, one of the reasons why I'm a little suspicious of philosophical utilitarianism in moral philosophy, because I don't know how to compare utility between persons, but moral consequentialism requires that you do so. And so because of problems with the philosophy of consciousness and the similarity between qualia and whatnot, I have trouble finding a basis on which I could reasonably make interpersonal comparisons of utility. And it's for that reason, because there's that big problem lurking there at the back of the philosophy of consciousness.
Yeah. I think the only way to understand what a deaf person or a blind person goes through is to get into an isolation tank.
Well, it is certainly interesting. I mean, people report hallucinations.
It won't be exactly the same. But it's a start.
So there's one thing. If you initially go blind, you will probably at least have dreams where you have sight. And so your visual cortex will still be active for a little while. Eventually, it may end up just going inactive. But one of the reasons why people in isolation tanks have visual hallucinations, whereas blind people will not report them, is because you have an active visual cortex. Your body's expecting to receive sight information. And so at least initially, when it lacks it, it'll start making some stuff up.
Yes. And I don't know. The brain is the most weirdest organ ever. I mean, it's yeah. It's not something I would like to go into because I don't know enough about it. It's just I just find it fascinating.
I don't even think humanity as a whole knows all that much about it. It's the problems about consciousness and how the brain produces consciousness and how it processes information and stuff like that are some of the deepest and hardest to investigate problems in biology and philosophy.
Yeah. So Facty says something very interesting. If we evolved seeing all the colors, we would not know the difference. So if we evolved to see all the entire spectrum, we wouldn't know the difference.
Well, we might be able to know that other things couldn't do that. So, for instance, we can tell, even without investigating the actual anatomy of, say, a dog's eye, that dogs are worse at color perception than humans are, right? So, for instance, if you throw a red ball into a field of green grass, dogs have trouble finding it. Even though to you it sticks out like a sore thumb.
Yes.
That's because dogs are essentially red-green colorblind. Red and green and yellow are basically the same color to a dog.
Yeah.
But blue is a different color. So even though to you it might seem like a blue ball is harder to find in a field of green grass, for your dog it's much, much easier. So
because of its darker accent.
So yeah, and also because blue is a different color to dogs than green, red, and yellow. So if you want to help your dog out when it comes to finding balls that you throw, get them balls that are painted or whatever blue. They'll have an easier time finding them.
As if I ever get a dog.
Well, this is to anyone who might be listening.
Yes, no, of course. I'm just speculating. Yeah, as if I ever get a dog.
Yeah.
I want to agree with Susanna. I'd rather be deaf than blind.
That's probably a pretty reasonable assumption. Humans are very sight dominant. Humans do not have particularly good hearing or smell, but especially among mammals, humans have exceptional sight. Now, if you compare human sight to birds, who are even more sight dominant, no. Humans generally have worse sight than birds, but birds are exceptionally good at vision, and they kind of suck at almost everything else.
Yes.
So, but yeah, for mammals, humans are very visually dominant.
Well, I have tinnitus, so that means that's the signs of going deaf. And I've been wearing glasses since I was 7, and I can't see far. So I'm already going blind, and I'm already going deaf, and I'm only 34.
Well, time to start learning Braille and sign language.
I think it's time. Or just go and get my eyes fixed and get 20/20 vision.
That's also an option. But then again, it might not be a bad idea to learn sign language.
No.
I'll say this, as someone who knows some deaf people, it really does mean a lot to a deaf person whenever they're in a space that's primarily occupied by hearing people, and some of the hearing people know enough sign language to at least have some kind of conversation with them or help them with whatever business transaction or whatever. It really does mean a lot. So
yes, I can understand. So Clive says, I'd get my clone to chop vegetables. It's the safer way.
That's true. It is the safer way to do it. Unless you're actually the clone and you don't know it.
Here we go. So, Surf, nice to see you. Good to see you. Thanks for coming. Susanna says, I know a little bit about the brain and how it actually works.
Yeah, it's true. We do know very little about the brain.
And she says she knows how it works. She knows a little bit about it, yeah. She knows a little bit about it.
We know so little about how the brain works, is what it said.
Oh, wow. I'm sorry. I think we should close up and go home or go to sleep because...
let's get the fourth question.
I think we should. Oh, my goodness. So it's getting late for me, so my brain is probably starting to switch off.
Well, I haven't had my normal amount of coffee, so my brain hasn't really switched on.
I didn't have one. Oh, I had one earlier, so it's been a while since I've had my coffee. Welcome, the plot hole. Nice to see you. Right, the fourth question is, If language influences how we perceive color,
Ooh.
what other things could language be changing our perception of?
So this is getting into what's called the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis. And the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis says that your perceptions of reality are fundamentally tied to the way that you linguistically express your perceptions of it. And that so speaking different languages can give you different perceptions of the universe around you. And it also means that learning a new language that has a significantly different way of conceptualizing and describing reality will allow you to think in new ways that you couldn't have thought before. Now, the strong case for the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis has largely been discarded in linguistics. People do not have big differences, apparently, in their perception of reality and their ability to interact with reality based on language. But there are some minor differences, and color is one of the important ones. English has what's called an advanced color system because English has a lot of basic color terms. So we have basic color terms for black, white, red, yellow, blue, green, orange, and brown, which is about the maximum number that any language has. Many languages only have two, dark and light. And then when you get a third one of the first ones you add in is red. So you can get dark, light, or red. And then after that, you start to get in a word that might mean red and yellow, and then another word that means blue and green and combinations of blue and green. And then usually you get red and yellow separated out, and then you still get blue and green stuck together. And it is actually the case that people who speak languages with fewer basic color terms have more trouble distinguishing between colors that people who speak languages with more basic color terms don't have as much trouble distinguishing.
That is so fascinating. I never knew that.
Yeah. So, but the thing is, you can train people to recognize more colors over time. So you can overcome this. But it is actually the case that, for instance, it's one of the most common things in languages across the world is to not have separate words for blue and green. And in those cases, people who speak those languages can legitimately have trouble telling whether something is blue or green, even if they learn, say, English.
Yes.
So language does affect your perception. But then again, there are certain things where it doesn't seem to. So for instance, I heard a claim once that languages without a subjunctive mood mean that people have trouble thinking about counterfactuals. But there doesn't actually seem to be any evidence for this. For instance, English basically doesn't have a subjunctive mood. It technically does, but it almost never gets used. And even when it does get used, it's almost always only in very formal writing. So you can effectively say that the average speaker of English doesn't have a subjunctive mood, but they are always going on about counterfactuals.
Okay, can you say that again in layman's terms?
Okay, so
without those big words that you were using.
So the subjunctive mood, you might be familiar with it if you speak a lot of Romance languages. And so the subjunctive mood is a verb form that is used for sentences that do not report the actual state of the world, but represent a hypothetical or desired state.
So the Romantic languages are French, Italian, Spanish, Portuguese.
French,
Spanish.
Italian, Portuguese, Catalan, Romansh, Romanian, Languedoc. There's a few more that I'm forgetting.
Wow, you are a minefield of information. Holy shit.
I do try.
Excuse my language.
So yeah, if you speak one of those, you're very likely familiar with the subjunctive mood. In English, it occurs.
What is the subjunctive mood?
So the subjunctive mood is the mood that it's a verb form. So and it represents actions that are in some way counterfactual. So, but you're not negating things. So you're not saying I didn't drink. You're saying that you hope to drink, or if you were in a world where you were drinking right now. Those when you're trying to express ideas like that, you put the sentence into the subjunctive, or the verb specifically, into the subjunctive mood. English tends to just use extra words to get that same meaning across. But in some languages, you actually change the verb form. So in French, there's the word to want has different forms in the present tense for indicative versus subjunctive. So je veux is I want in the indicative, but je voudrais is I want in the the subjunctive mood. And the subjunctive mood in that case in French tends to be used in cases where, in that case, it's usually just for being polite. But with other verbs, it could indicate that this is a desired outcome or that you are proposing a hypothetical.
Okay, I'm going to agree with Theo, and my head went bang. And 9 o'clock here is also like, what? and 9 o'clock also just says, I've wandered lonely as a cloud. It's like people's minds are like off somewhere else.
Well, we did have a major shift from like theoretical physics to linguistics, so sorry about that, guys. But
but my mind is like, I don't know how to perceive exactly what you just said, because it's just on another level for me.
Well, let's just say this: there are some languages that have a very easy time talking about counterfactuals in a way that English doesn't. But there's no evidence that for that reason, English speakers are worse at talking about counterfactuals.
What is a counterfactual? Please explain that to me.
So counterfactual
is
anything that's not actually true, but you're entertaining it for some reason. So, for instance, if I said, "Gee,
like
what
time
if
travel?"
Yeah, like time travel, or if I were to say, like, "Oh man, it's about 42 degrees right now. I kind of wish it was 30 degrees instead." What I just use is the colloquial version of English, where I don't use the subjunctive. But if you're being formal, you would say, "I wish it were 30 degrees right now."
Mm-hmm.
And using that were is using the now mostly gone English subjunctive, because you're talking about a counterfactual. It's not 30 degrees. It's actually about 41. So when you say that you wish that for it to be 30 degrees, that's when you would use a subjunctive mood.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And in English, that does happen in formal English. And I have a tendency to actually use the subjunctive mood in English because the version of English I speak is extremely artificial. So I'm a weirdo like that.
Well, Clive tends to name his colors. I call blue hashtag 000FF and green 00FF00. That way I can distinguish more colors. So then Icarus responds with short form is nice. Hashtag oof. Hashtag 0F0.
Oh no! See, so these are hex codes. So in
yes, I know.
So
I do Photoshop, so I know.
Oh, okay.
And then Icarus Dapper is talking in Celsius. He doesn't talk in Fahrenheit when he's talking to someone that uses Celsius.
I try not to.
Unless he's talking, like you said, unless he's talking to an American, he'll talk in Fahrenheit, in Celsius.
Yeah, I like to switch it up based on where the person is from.
So I appreciate that he was talking in Celsius and not in Fahrenheit, because that makes a difference for me. Like, don't tell me what 90 degrees is, because I don't know. 90 degrees Fahrenheit means nothing to me. I don't even know if that's hot or cold.
It's hot.
So, is it? Okay, you see? But I was still, now, couple days down the line, I won't even remember that, because I don't use Fahrenheit. I never use Fahrenheit. Never had a need to use Fahrenheit, so I would never remember something like that.
So 90 is a bit higher than 32.
90 degrees is also a corner.
Well, that too, yeah. But 90 Fahrenheit is a little bit warmer than 32 Celsius.
Okay. So it's around that. Okay. All right. I've got nothing. I've got nothing for question 4, because you've just put me in a tailspin of I don't know what.
I'm sorry.
It's okay. It's okay.
Yeah, you're always opening up Pandora's box when you decide to ask me about linguistics.
I think I opened up Pandora's box just having you on.
That might be true. Yeah, I can't really deny that. I can't argue.
But I think I'm ready to close this down, because my mind is just now ready to go sleep.
Sorry, guys, I broke Roxy.
He did break. I am broken. I will be alive tomorrow.
That's good.
Oh goodness. All right. So let's finish this up. What a question, Marius? Good to see you. It's been a while. The question 4, we're not going to go back into it because it's broken me. So question 4 was, if language influences how we perceive color, what other things could language be changing our perception of? And I'm now too broken to even answer that question. I don't know. Right. So I know that you recently had your 5,000 subscriber special. So
Yes.
very much a congratulations to that.
Thank you.
And it was a birthday stream as well. So how did the stream go, since I wasn't able to carry on watching it? I was in for a little bit and I wasn't able to finish it. So how did it go?
So we went for about 5 hours. I had a lot of fun. More viewers than typical for my channel tuned in. I think we topped out somewhere around 112, I think, for viewers. So that's pretty good. I did a lot of some debunking of silly stuff. I played 1 hour of Doom based on the poll that I took of the audience watching. So I played some Doom Eternal for an hour. And then went back to more debunking stuff. I had a number of guests who came in and out. So I think I ended up having 4 guests, none of whom were there for the whole time. They rotated. But yeah, it was a really good time, and we did not get through all of the dumb material that I had for us to debunk. So the final video that we didn't actually get to, I am turning into a series of scripted videos where I'm going to go through this talk given by Dan Biddle, because I have a bit of a grudge against Dan Biddle, because his legal representation team likes to mess with my channel, which I don't appreciate. So. Yes. He gets far more attention from me than he deserves, but only because I have that grudge.
Yes. Well, again, congratulations on the 5,000 subscribers. I've seen some of your stuff, and I think it's well deserved.
Thank you. I really appreciate that.
You're welcome. So, what is next on your channel?
Well, let's see.
This series of videos that you want to do.
Well, so every Tuesdays we do a show. It's usually the show that I call Kent with Bent, where me and my friend Bent Hovind, no relation, go and take a look at Kent Hovind videos, and we kind of just drink while we debunk it, because Kent Hovind is very low level. So you can turn debunking Kent Hovind into a drinking game, and you're still actually debunking him because it's so easy.
And you probably come out drunk at the end of it.
I do try to carefully measure how much I'm drinking so that I stay coherent and don't do anything I would regret. But by the end of it, I usually have had a bit to drink. Then Thursdays, I do a scripted video that comes out at 5 p.m. Mountain Standard Time. So that does change for most people because I live in a place where we don't change the clocks for daylight savings time. But anyway, right now, we are running a series called Canadian Young Earth Creationists, where I'm taking a look at Creation Ministries International Canada branch. And they have a show called Creation Magazine Live. And I'm picking apart an episode where they talk about why they think the flood of Noah happened and why it was global. Yeah. So my next, I also have, hopefully coming in about a week, maybe 2, but hopefully 1, I will have the next episode of my speculative evolution project, where that's primarily community driven. So I am not creating the new creatures and whatnot for this. People are basing submissions that I can approve or not based on their proposed evolution from previous organisms in the project. So it's a whole community trying to evolve an entire biosphere on an alien planet together as a group project.
That sounds amazing.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun. We currently have 12 videos. So the number lucky 13 should be coming out in a week or 2. Saturday, I'm going to hopefully finish up looking at spirit science history. So in case you guys don't know about the channel Spirit Science, it is very crazy. And I am taking a look at their history video. But I also have other irregular series, like I have interviews with people who are former Young Earth creationists called Leading Young Earth Creationism. I occasionally, very occasionally, every once in a while, I'll do things like host debate. I might be in it or not. My most recent debate was a 3-way debate about whether or not biology indicates the existence of God, and that involved Finding Truth, a Muslim apologist, Steve McRae, a agnostic, and Jackson Wheat, a biology student who is an atheist. And so they all had that discussion while I moderated. So yeah, there's a whole lot of stuff that if you like sort of debunking, especially creationism, and things like that. Yeah, I have a lot of stuff on my channel about that.
Yeah, I wake up to your stuff with Beethoven.
Oh, nice.
As a notification on my phone. And I never get a chance to watch it. So I need to take some time to actually watch these things, because I think Kent Hovind is another kind of human being.
He's a scumbag, let's be honest.
Yes. I try to be diplomatic about that. That's okay.
I used to be more diplomatic about Ken Hovind, but over the last few years, I mean, it just recently came out that first of all, he hasn't married anyone but his first wife, but he's had 2 other quote-unquote wives that he never actually bothered to legally marry. And the third one, he stole $133,000 of her retirement money.
That's so amazing. That's such an amazing person, someone you should actually look up to.
Oh, yeah, definitely. There's nothing more godly and Christian than stealing your wife's retirement money.
Or being with 2 women you're not married to.
Well, yeah,
and
there's
still
that
married
too.
To your first.
Well, no,
anyway.
they are divorced. He is divorced. Legally divorced.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Well, at least he did something good in his life.
Well, he didn't have much.
Being with someone else.
He didn't have much of a choice in the matter. He showed up to court, and 8 minutes later, the divorce was finalized, and he asked his then ex-wife, to marry him again, and she said, "No, never talk to me again." And she hasn't talked to him ever since.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
Good for her.
I don't blame her.
Right. So the next Out of This World Thinking will be on the 11th of July, and we will have AB Science on. So please be sure to tune in for that. And then I am pleased to announce that the next Scientology show is back on the 3rd of July at 7 p.m. CAT and 11 a.m. Mountain Standard Time. So please be sure to watch in. These shows will not be on every month, but it will be on. So please be sure to. I'll announce it on this show, and I will announce it on Twitter. So please be sure to take those into account. Please be sure to listen on my show or follow me on Twitter to know when the next Scientology show on. So I'm very happy to announce that we have that back on. Also, I am still uploading Scientology shorts, which are bite-sized versions of the stream, so you don't have to watch the entire stream to get the information that my shorts are giving you, which I think is also quite nice. I would rather prefer a short like that than watching a full stream, to be honest. That is why I'm doing it, because I'm doing what I would prefer to watch. Right. Anything else you'd like to say before we say goodbye?
I think I've covered it. Just thank you for having me on. I had a blast.
I'm glad you did. So I see, like I said, there's nothing to prepare for.
No, yeah. I just came in as I am, and I think I did an okay job.
That's the point. Before I go, I do have 2 tips that came in. So thank you, both of them who were anonymous. The first one was when my screen decides to refresh. The first one was anonymous for $6.98, no message. The next one was anonymous for $5, best of luck and keep growing. So thank you to, I don't know if it's the same person or 2 different people, but thank you, anonymous, for the tips. I do appreciate it very, very much. With that, please remember to subscribe if you haven't already. Also, if you would like to donate like Anonymous has, donate to the cause. It would really, truly appreciate. I would really, truly appreciate it very, very much. And if you wish to support me monthly, I have a Patreon. All the links in the description. And also come and watch me play games on Twitch. The links are also in the description. I play every Tuesday and Thursday evenings, my time, 6 p.m. my time. I'm not too sure on the US times for that. But if you'd like to come and watch me play The Sims or Valheim, I might get into Bioshock at some point and Fallout as well. But if you'd like to come and watch me play and hang out and just chat and talk nonsense, please come join me there on Twitch as well, and drop a follow there as well. I think I'm done plugging everything. If you haven't subscribed to Dapper Dino, please do so as well. His links are also in the description. And with that, thank you very much for joining me, Dapper. I do appreciate it very, very much.
You're welcome.
And as all my guests know, you have an open invitation to come back on whenever you like. And we can talk behind the scenes about that. Other than that, thanks everyone so much for coming, and we'll see you soon, and have a great week from here. Cheers, everyone.